Would you survive being Isekaid into Eastmarch, one of the 9 holds of Skyrim? Eastmarch is home to the city of Windhelm and the seat of the Stormcloak Rebellion. And realistically, the answer to that question is probably no. But that probably does hold a lot of weight, so bear with me. Just in case you do happen to wake up and find yourself magically transported to the world of Skyrim, especially in one of the snowier places in Skyrim, then how could you hypothetically survive? Well, I may not be a wilderness expert, but I've got a lot of love for Skyrim, and I have read more than a few modern character finds themselves magically transported into a fantasy world type of fan fictions. And I'm here to teach you how to maximize your odds of surviving if you do happen to find yourself in the hold of Eastmarch. What is an Isekai? For those that aren't already aware, an Isekai is a subgenre mostly found in anime and manga, but can also be found in other mediums, where a character finds themselves transported to a magical or fantastical world. Sometimes they arrive with whatever they had on them before being transported. For the sake of equality, we'll just assume that when you find yourself in Skyrim, you just have the clothes on your back. We'll do a pretty average outfit that a lot of people would own, running shoes, socks, jeans, t-shirt, hoodie, and whatever your undergarments of preference are. And if you have disability aids, we'll assume you get those too. After all, it'd be quite useful to show up with glasses or hearing aids or a cane or whatever you need to accommodate whatever you have. However, once they break or the batteries run out or whatever the case may be, you'll need to source a fix or a replacement for them yourself. Now, let's talk about Isekai circumstances. Generally, there's 2 ways to get transported into an Isekai. Magically, just like wake up, find yourself teleported there type, and there's the reincarnation type. In reincarnation Isekai, the person transported generally dies beforehand and gets reincarnated into a new form in the fantasy world. We will not be exploring this option in this video. Instead, what we'll be exploring is the more teleporting type where you are still yourself. You have all of your usual skills, your abilities, your same body and everything. You just wake up in Skyrim. Because of this, some of the advice that I give will not be applicable to everyone. I am sorry about this, but unfortunately, I just can't really cover every single unique circumstance for every possible person who could watch this video. I mean, I myself am a neandroid, I'm a cat android, and I'm not even going to talk about what it would be like for an android to get Isekai into Skyrim. I'll just be focusing on the human side of things. Certain locations will be more dangerous for people of a specific gender presentation, and I will do my best to tailor the advice to make sure that all sorts of different potential skills are highlighted. But if you have like a super specific case, I might not actually bring it up, but feel free to do so in the comments. Feel free to tell me about the specificities of your scenario. Now, because we're not doing the reincarnation trope, you will not be the Dragonborn when you show up in Skyrim. But don't worry too much about potentially dying to a dragon. I am going to explore the hypothetical where you show up before the Dragonborn or the dragons themselves do. But you will still have to worry about other factors such as the wildlife, bandits, brewing civil war, and since this is Skyrim, the cold. Now, let's talk about locations. Establishing whereabouts. The first thing you'll want to do when you find yourself in Skyrim is figure out where you're at, what your location is. Now, Eastmarch is split into 4 parts by its rivers. The White River is the longest one, and it feeds into the Sea of Ghosts, but River Yorgrim and Darkwater River feed into the White River as well, which is what leads to these 4 sections. The northmost section is the easiest to identify, as River Yorgrim and White River will be to your south. This section contains the city of Windhelm, which is the largest city in the hold, so if you happen to find yourself within or beside Windhelm, you likely don't need any help figuring out your location because that already is a pretty prominent landmark. But if you find yourself near some springs or somewhere in between a river and some mountains, then you've ended up in the largest section of Eastmarch. There is a main road in this section, as well as a couple of smaller settlements, So depending on which you're closer to, you'll either want to follow the river as your guiding path, or head towards the base of the mountains to find the road. If you're not already next to Windhelm, or in the largest section of Eastmarch created by the rivers, then you're actually not a bad position, as this leaves the other two sections created by the rivers, both of which are small enough that if you just head east, you should come across either the White River or the Darkwater River soon enough. Roads do roughly follow along the side of both rivers, so once you find a river, it won't be too long until you stumble across a signpost, and then you'll definitely be able to get your bearings pretty easily. So, now that we've established how to figure out your starting location, let's go through the list of where you should go to, where you should avoid, and where you should stay put if you've already found yourself there. Windhelm. Of course, I am going to start off with the main city of the Hold as the first location. Windhelm is the oldest extant city in Skyrim and is ruled by Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak, the leader of the Stormcloak Rebellion. As religious freedom is part of the grounds for the rebellion in Skyrim, Windhelm is a city that openly allows worship of the ninth divine Talos, even still having a temple dedicated to Talos worship. And it sounds like a decent city, right? Well, Windhelm is not exactly kind to outsiders, housing a lot of Dunmer refugees in what is now referred to as the Grey Quarter, what used to be the Snow Quarter, but is now considered a slum where certain disgruntled Nords go to yell slurs and antagonize the Dunmer. And Argonians aren't even allowed within the city, and instead they reside and work outside at the docks. And to top that off, there is also an active serial killer who butchers young women in the streets, and the guards do nothing about it because they say that they don't have enough resources to investigate or put a stop to it. So, yeah. Oh yeah, there's also an orphan child trying to contact the Dark Brotherhood via corpse ritual in a semi-abandoned house. So, does the city of Windhelm fall under the category of try to go here, try to avoid, or stay put if you found yourself here? Well, it really depends on who you are. If you're a young, femme-presenting person, I'd say try to get out of there as soon as possible, or try to never find yourself alone at night at the very least. After all, you would make a prime target for the serial killer known as the Butcher. You have no ties in the city, so there's no one to raise hell about your death. In fact, even when prominent members of the community are killed in Windhelm, it's not even enough to get the guards involved. So if you think you might be a target demographic for the Butcher, then keep watching because there are some nearby locations that you'll likely find more safety within. If you don't think you're going to have to worry about the Butcher, then Windhelm does leave you with a few options. For the particularly charismatic and maybe slightly immoral, if you want to quickly gain access to a place to stay for free and heck, maybe even get a quick payment out of it, you could try discreetly entering the Arantino residence. In-game, it has a pretty weak lock to pick, and once you're inside, you'll be able to find Aventus Arantino trying to do a ritual to summon an assassin from the Dark Brotherhood. Well, it's ambiguous how long he's been there in the game. Before going back home, he was an orphan in Riften. Now, since in this hypothetical Isekai scenario, we're exploring the likelihood of survival pre-Dragonborn events, who knows if Aventus will actually be there or not? If he isn't, you'll have a sheltered building to squat in, likely with a few odds and ends that can be sold or traded for food. Or if Aventus is there, and you don't mind bluffing a bit, with the risk of running afoul of the Dark Brotherhood, you could pretend to be an assassin, and see if you can persuade Aventus to let you stay for a bit before leaving to perform your, job. Just be careful about getting too involved, unless you're particularly keen on joining or destroying the Dark Brotherhood. Hey, to each their own, and there's no reason why you have to be the Dovahkiin themselves to get started on the Dark Brotherhood questline, at least as far as I can tell from the lore. But the Arantino residence obviously isn't the only option if you find yourself in Windhelm. One of the most obvious, but perhaps the most dangerous option is to join up with the Stormcloak Rebellion. They're always looking for new recruits after all, but keep in mind that you'll have to pass a trial first. Now, that trial is to kill ice wraiths off at the Serpent Stone, one of the 13 standing stones dotted across the landscape of Skyrim. However, it's not as simple as it would initially seem. I mean, killing ice wraiths already is a tricky task in and of itself, but the Serpent Stone is located on an island called Serpent Stone Isle, which means not only do you have to kill an ice wraith, you also have to travel out to an island surrounded by frigid water and make your way back to Windhelm in one piece. Now, if you do this quest as the Dovahkiin in Skyrim at a low level, Galmar Stonefist, the man who gives you this quest, will give you some stuff to help you survive, namely an elixir of resist cold, and a few unique potions that can only be received when doing this quest. 3 potions called Ice Wraith Banes. Assuming you survive the initiation trial, you will be a member of the Stormcloak army and will need to do whatever tasks are required for a member. You are likely to get some rudimentary training, as well as be given access to army barracks, food, a weapon, some basic armor. While the trial will be difficult and you will start off low in the ranks, this may not be as bad of an option for those who already have experience either in the military or who already have some combat training. Still though, I wouldn't recommend this as an option for the average person, as sooner or later you will be expected to fight for the Stormcloak Rebellion, and even if you do survive any combat encounters that you find yourself in, you better hope that you don't have any wounds bad enough to force you to retire. Even in a world with magic potions and healing spells, there is evidence that magic can't fix everything. Losing a limb doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that can be cured without serious healing talent, healing that likely won't be spared on a single soldier. I only recommend joining either army in the Civil War as an absolute last resort, especially as you likely won't be given much training and resources, as what little is available needs to be spread out across many recruits. For those who are really itching for combat training, I would recommend working odd jobs until you have enough money to afford travel to Whiterun, where you may be accepted into the companions. At least there, you're more likely to get personalized training from any number of qualified teachers, and you'll also likely get more of a sense of independence, as you'll be making money from the jobs that you get to go on. Speaking of odd jobs though, work may not be too difficult to find in Windhelm, though most available jobs likely won't pay much. You may be able to find some work doing cleaning at the Palace of the King, such as working as a servant or a maid. You could also check the docks for work, though don't expect much in the way of pay for that from the Nords, and don't expect a warm welcome from the Argonians. Still though, if you're able-bodied and can handle the cold weather rolling off the sea, then you may have luck helping out there, doing tasks such as unloading deliveries. While Windhelm isn't a particularly large city in the game, even if you can't find steady employment, you may be able to earn enough money to get yourself out of Windhelm and into one of the other holds, possibly to join an established guild, which may provide you with a more steady stream of income and a roof over your head. Another option, one which will be much more difficult to attain for most people, is for those who do happen to find themselves with a grasp of magic and possessing a convincing personality. Now, I don't expect that everyone who gets Isekaid into Skyrim will be able to do magic right off the bat. While the Dovahkiin does have access to 2 spells at the start of the game in Skyrim, maybe an extra one depending on which race you choose at the start of the game, I doubt that everyone who gets Isekai in Skyrim will just automatically be able to do magic spells. But I wouldn't be surprised if some people can. And so if you do happen to find yourself in Windhelm and can do a spell of any kind, it might be worth visiting the court wizard, Wunferth the Unliving. If you want an inn to go see him, he does buy Nightshade from the merchant Levi Cruelsea, who might be willing to hire you to make a delivery of these poisonous flowers. This will give you the chance to talk to Wunferth and ask if you can be an apprentice of his. Just be aware that if he says yes, you'll likely have to keep up with his odd sleeping schedule. Wunferth is definitely not much of a sleeper since he wakes up at 4 in the morning and goes to bed at midnight. Now, while Wunferth might not be much interested in sleeping, you obviously need to get your sleep. Finding a warm, sheltered location to sleep in may be the toughest task, as while it may not cost much to rent a room in an in-game, paying 10 septims a night for a room in a location with a lot of foot traffic, drinking, and live music might not provide you with the most restful experience. And considering that the room is about the same price as a warm meal, you may want to try to find somewhere else where you can sleep for free. Well, by running the deliveries for Levi Cruelty as mentioned before, at least in-game, you become good enough friends that you're allowed within the House of Clan Cruelty where you can sleep, provided you're not doing so in the hours considered to be trespassing. So if you do happen to do that quest and you don't find any sort of apprenticeship with Windfirth, then you may want to consider doing some couch crashing, with permission, of course. And hey, you may be able to befriend other people as well. While Skyrim the game restricts befriending people to usually doing a quest for them, obviously talking to these characters in a real-life scenario will allow for more complex relationships to develop. So, you may get along well enough to be invited as a guest to someone's house just by way of becoming genuine friends with the person and interacting with them enough. But what if you don't want to stay in the city of Windhelm, but still want to stay in the general area? Well, this brings us to our next section. Windhelm stables and farms. Just outside of the city of Windhelm are numerous farms as well as the city stables. For those with experience or just an interest in animal care, you may be able to find work either at the stables or at one of the farms. Now, it won't be glamorous work by any means, as anyone who's had to deal with cleaning up barn stalls would know, but it is hard work that will keep your hands moving. Same with working crops on the farms, but due to the cold temperatures, working the soil will likely be a bit difficult. Still though, if you're willing to ask if you can work, it seems likely based on the attitudes of many farmers in Skyrim that they will gladly accept an extra set of hands. And while they may not have the funds to pay you directly like in the game, it could still be worth seeing if you can trade your labor for meals and a sheltered place to sleep. Remember, even if it doesn't pay much, it's honest work. So if you find yourself at one of the farms or the city stables, and you're able-bodied and willing to put in the effort, these are definitely what I'd consider to be stay here and survive options when it comes to the possible location options in Eastmarch. Kynesgrove. If you head roughly south from Windhelm, following one of the main roads, you'll find yourself in Kynesgrove. Don't worry if you're unsure which road to follow, as the smaller towns in Skyrim tend to have better quality signs on the road, so once you find a signpost, you should be pointed in the right direction. Kynesgrove is a small mining town which was originally supposed to be a logging town. However, like the name suggests, the trees surrounding Kynesgrove are considered sacred to the Adric divine known as Kyne, or sometimes referred to as Kinnereth in the modern day by followers of the Nine Divines. Being a mining town, the main job available in Kynesgrove is, of course, mining. Mining is physically an incredibly strenuous job, so it's not exactly at the top of my list when it comes to recommended professions. However, for those with an interest and a talent for magic, you may want to seek out Dravinia the Stoneweaver, who works as a mage keeping the mines from collapsing while also cooling down the air in the mines so that way the workers don't overheat. She uses frost salts in order to keep the mines comfortably cool, and will offer free alteration training in exchange for these salts, so someone enterprising may be able to haggle for or acquire using a certain quintuple-digit discount these salts in the larger city of Windhelm and use them in exchange for free training. When asked about where would be best to learn more about magic, Dravinia will point you in the direction of the College of Winterhold, which of course is located in the hold of the same name, Winterhold. And while the college is easy enough to get into in the game of Skyrim, for those interested in going to Winterhold and becoming a student there, having a recommendation from an established mage certainly wouldn't hurt when trying to enroll. Beyond the possibility of free training, there is also a job here that can be completed by someone with a persuasive bearing, or someone who can throw a decent punch. Rogi Knotbeard, one of the workers at the mine, has racked up a rather large tab with the local innkeeper Idra. Idra may ask for your help to convince Rogi not to pay his tab, but to forget about it. When talking to Rogi, you have a few different options, but those who know they can be persuasive should try to convince him that his cycle of guilt about his tab really isn't worth it. Otherwise, be ready to threaten to knock some sense into him and be able to back up your threat. The reward for completing this quest in the game is a weapon and an armor piece, so you can likely expect the same if you do happen upon this quest yourself. Now, don't be discouraged if adventuring isn't for you, as the city of Windhelm isn't too far away, and you may be able to sell the weapon and armor for money to get a place to stay, or trade it for some food to keep yourself full. Or hey, if the life of an adventurer doesn't sound bad to you for whatever reason, you could always don your armor before heading to the next location on the map. Narzulbur. Alright, despite my lead-in, this will be the first place that I consider to be a try to avoid this place, and if you happen to wake up here, you'd best be going on your way, because this next location is an orc stronghold. Now, while I do have a soft spot for orcs in Skyrim, something to remember is that in order to be welcomed into their strongholds, you do need to either be bloodkin to the orcs, or be an orc already. And while I shouldn't make assumptions, something tells me that the majority of my audience is not part of the Orsimer demographic. This means that unless you're willing to immediately run off and do a quest to find a pair of enchanted gloves known as the Forge Master's Fingers, you won't be welcomed into the stronghold. Now, this is a radiant quest in the game, with the possible location being chosen randomly from a set list of possible dungeons, meaning you could be tasked with going somewhere with just some generic bandits, or going to a cave with vampires in it. Not something that I'd recommend doing, at least not without decent armor, some combat or magic training, and a follower to accompany you. If you do find yourself in Narzulbur, my only advice would be to try and make your way to someplace more welcoming nearby. A good bet would likely be Kynesgrove, as it's not too far away, just roughly west of Narzulbur as the crow flies. Just don't head too far west-southwest, or you might find yourself stumbling upon the next location that we'll be looking at. Riverside Shack. Riverside Shack is, as the name suggests, a shack. And not a particularly secure one at that. This shack can be found along the eastern bank of the White River and is usually home to a leveled animal. Now, whenever I've stumbled onto this shack, 6 times out of 10, that leveled animal has been a bear. The other 3 times, it's been a saber cat, and once, it's been a wolf. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this shack, you may be asking yourself, how does a bear or a giant cat find itself inside of a shack? Well, you see, this shack has no door. In place of a door is just a giant opening in the wall. Wildlife aside, having a huge opening in a shack in the cold weather that Skyrim gets is not exactly great. Still, if you want to take your bets on not getting attacked by a wild animal, this shack would provide more shelter than just being out in the middle of nowhere without anything to protect you from the wind, rain, or snow. This shack also has a bit of a garden plot outside, some supplies, and a locked chest, so if you're willing to risk getting an infectious disease from a wild animal bite, you at least will get some good items for your trouble. And if you get lucky enough to have a couple of bobby pins in your hair when you get Isekaid, and can jimmy the lock on the chest, you'll find one of the unique treasure maps. Now, don't get too excited about the treasure map though, as it leads to treasure on literally the opposite end of Skyrim. Still though, you may be able to sell it to an adventurer, or maybe if you thrive in Skyrim, you'll find the treasure yourself one day. So overall, my advice on the Riverside Shack is, it might be better than trying to survive a night out in the wilderness without any kind of shelter, where you're at risk of an animal attack at any time. But if you find yourself in a more secure location like an actual settlement, then maybe don't give up the company of people to seek out a derelict old shack. But fortunately, the shack, being along the bank of the White River, could help you navigate to a much safer, while still fairly private, residential option for those who are more antisocial. So if you prefer to avoid the company of an entire settlement, while still having a roof over your head, then you're in luck, because if you follow the White River upstream, you'll come across Mixwater Mill. Mixwater Mill is a lumber mill which can be found by walking upstream of the eastern bank of the White River, and it has only one resident, but 2 houses. Before the Civil War started in Skyrim, this mill used to have Gilfra and 5 workers, but when the war started, all of Gilfra's workers packed up to go join one of the armies. This means that running the entire mill, which used to be tasks distributed across 6 people total, is now entirely on the shoulders of Gilfra, who works an insane amount of hours in order to try to keep up. Because of this, in-game Gilfra will gladly pay to have firewood chopped, and she likely would be willing to do the same to any modern person who finds themselves at Mixwater Mill. This is a situation where you do have to be willing to sell yourself a bit. There's an entire worker's house sitting empty, so you're going to have to do things the old-fashioned way. Offer to work in exchange for shelter and food. This will likely be one of the only opportunities in Skyrim for you to have your own private housing in exchange for just labor. So if you've got the strength and endurance to help Gilfra at the mill, then a house may be available quite early on in your adventure. On top of that, Gilfra is also a potential marriage candidate in the game. So if you love the lifestyle and the two of you get along well, not only might you find yourself with a house, you may also find yourself with a spouse. Overall, I do think this is a great location to find yourself in, especially if you lean more towards a private kind of existence, but are okay with doing physical labor and also want to enjoy a slightly more temperate location in Skyrim. Now, if you do prefer the nicer environment of the southern part of the Hold of Eastmarch, but would like more company, then I suggest you keep heading south towards our next location. Darkwater Crossing. Darkwater Crossing, like Kynesgrove, is a mining town, but Darkwater Crossing has the perk of being located further south, where the weather doesn't seem to be quite as harsh. However, this location does have a drawback. It is unfortunately close to Darkwater Pass, a cave containing many Falmer. Durkeithus, one of the settlers in Darkwater Crossing, is trapped inside cave during the events of Skyrim, and needs to be rescued by the Dovahkiin. But chances are in this Isekai scenario that he hasn't gone there yet, so it may be possible to warn him before he decides to go exploring. Exploring the settlement yourself won't take too much time, as Darkwater Crossing is notably small, based solely on the location known as Golden Rock Mine, a corundum ore mine. Only a few people live in Darkwater Crossing, 6 named NPCs, including Durkeithus, assuming he hasn't already been captured by the Falmer when you show up in Darkwater Crossing. The only work that can be found here is mining. Or is it? The area is also tied to a delivery quest in Skyrim, given to the Dovahkiin by Sylgia, a Nord in the nearby mining town of Shorestone, in the hold called the Rift. You see, Sylgia's parents are the ones that established Darkwater Crossing, so if you've been dreaming of becoming a career in Skyrim, Darkwater Crossing may just present you with an opportunity to get started on accomplishing your dream. Even if you aren't needed to run letters between Shorestone and Darkwater Crossing, you may have the opportunity to try to run supply deliveries to the mining town. If you don't mind carrying things, and also don't mind the risk of bandits trying to steal your goods. Speaking of bandits, though, it's time we start talking about the areas that are avoid at all costs. Towers, forts, and caves. There are numerous towers, forts, and caves dotting the landscape of Eastmarch, and out of all the ones marked in game, a total of 16, only one single place is safe to find yourself in. Eldergleam Sanctuary is home to Kinnereth worshippers, and as long as you don't try to harvest sap from the Eldergleam tree, you'll be fine. You'll have company in the form of people who visit the cave to worship Kinnereth. There are hot springs outside near the cave entrance, so you'll have a place to warm yourself if you've got to chill and clean yourself. And you can fish inside of the cave. As far as caves go, Eldergleam Sanctuary might be one of the most peaceful ones in the game. But the same can't be said for literally any other cave, tower, or fort in Eastmarch. Unless the cave you're entering has hot springs outside, visited by hunters and pilgrims, then don't enter a cave. You will likely never come back out. Bandits are a fairly solid bet for most caves and forts, but you can also encounter Falmer, warlocks, Draugr, and vampires as well. Oh yeah, and if you are near the hot springs and you see a wooden shack, maybe don't enter it. That's Moira's home. Moira is the hag raven that the Dragonborn can get engaged to during the quest A Night to Remember. And obviously we wouldn't want to spoil that match made in heaven, right? So yeah, avoid forts, avoid towers, and avoid any cave that isn't Eldergleam Sanctuary, which should be obvious based off the hunters enjoying the hot springs and the pilgrims who may be willing to share things with you, such as food, money, and knowledge. Now, let's get into some things that will generally be useful for surviving in Skyrim, things like food, money, and knowledge. While I've already touched on these in various parts, if you decide to leave Eastmarch or you just can't remember specific details, then having some broad information can help you. With regards to food, you'll want to check barrels in outdoor locations. Often in Skyrim, but not always, so be careful, the barrels in outdoor locations aren't marked as owned, so taking items from these barrels is fine. You can often find a piece of produce or two in these barrels, such as a stray cabbage or an apple. The same can be said for sacks in outdoor locations as well, though in these you're more likely to find ingredients such as flour or salt. Fishing can also be done if you get lucky enough to either find a fishing rod or to buy one from a merchant. I must admit, I've had not much luck with finding fishing rods for sale, but you never know. Eastmarch is certainly not lacking when it comes to sources of water, so if you can get your hands on some fishing equipment, then this may be a good option for you. Hunting game might be tricky if you have no experience with archery, and knowing what to do with the carcass is going to be even more difficult unless you have some experience with butchering already. But if you do, this may be a good way for you to not only get some food, but also some money, since hides can be sold for tanning and cuts of meat can be sold to meat vendors. For the average person though, making money from hunting isn't a very realistic goal. If you can find an alchemist or a general merchant, then you may be able to make a bit of money selling flowers or other alchemical ingredients. Just be careful about not accidentally ingesting any poisonous ingredients. Nightshade sells for a decent amount, but you might experience some adverse effects if you forget to clean your hands in between collecting nightshade and preparing or eating food. Another way to make some coin is by chopping wood, but do keep in mind that you'll need an axe for this. Not all wood chopping blocks in Skyrim come with an axe, unfortunately, and a lot of characters who chop wood for their job keep their axe on their person. Still, you may stumble across one at a mill or manage to find one at a general store, and the physical act of chopping wood should also help keep you warm. Just be careful about how much you sweat, as once you stop moving, any sweat you've perspired will cool you down quite quickly, so try your best to stay dry. And as much as I would love to be able to impart a whole bunch more general survival knowledge like stay dry in order to keep warm, I must admit I'm not a survival expert. And that knowledge really only comes from my experience with Canadian winters. So being able to learn things from people in Skyrim while actually being in Skyrim will be beneficial. After all, even though this video is about how to survive in Skyrim, I am not an expert in surviving in Skyrim. If you're looking for official training, like the kind you'd get in-game, your best bet would be to find trainers in Windhelm, as there are 4 in the game, specifically for two-handed weapons, pickpocketing, speech, and destruction. Though you can find some alteration training in Kynesgrove as mentioned before. However, there's more than just the in-game skills to learn. If you want to learn how to prepare meat, for instance, try finding a butcher or a hunter and seeing if you can be taken on as an apprentice. With a hunter, you may also be able to learn some basics of archery. Just remember that if someone doesn't want to teach you something, don't take it personally, and be respectful of their decision. Also, as some general advice, don't be afraid to do item trades or to offer labor in exchange for things, especially if you have no money of your own yet. You may not be able to afford a night in an inn on your own, but if you have a good singing voice and there's no bard on duty, you may be able to work out a deal with an innkeeper to do some performing in exchange for a night's stay. Just don't assume that you'll be offered it without proposing it yourself. Be polite but direct, and ask if it be a possibility. Overall, a lot of the possibility for survival in Skyrim is going to be based around finding and being accepted by other people. And hey, if you find yourself feeling alone in Eastmarch, even when surrounded by a crowd, then maybe you'll have more luck journeying to one of the other holds. If that does sound more appealing to you, then consider subscribing, as I do plan on making a video going over surviving being Isekaid into every hold in Skyrim, so you'll be able to learn more about all the wonderful locations Skyrim has to offer, and may find that one or two of them are easier to survive in than the others. But what do you think? Would you be able to survive being Isekaid into Eastmarch? If you did magically wake up in Eastmarch, what would you do? That's all from me for now, and hopefully I'll see you for the next video in this series, which will be about surviving in Falkreath Hold. And if you don't want to wait for another video to come out in order to hear from me again, then consider checking out my streams on Twitch, where I go live generally around 4 times a week. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or good night.